Hello, my name is Mr. Chipman. I teach biology and AP biology at Murray High School in Murray, Kentucky. This is Unit 4, Cell Communication and the Cell Cycle. 4.1 Cell Communication. Looking at some of the general ideas on cellular communication before we get into specifics. This is a pretty short unit, not a difficult unit either. The difficult part of this unit oftentimes is some of the pictures and some of the graphics, is understanding some of the interactions. So yeah, let's look at that. So there are some words that you need to be familiar with when it comes to cellular communication. First of all, what is cellular communication? Hopefully it's pretty self-explanatory. This is when cells are communicating. Could be short distance, could be cells sitting next to one another, communicating with one another, or it could be like long distance, like, across the body, the brain communicating with the foot. How does that work? Well, it works through this process, cellular communication. Typically, there is some sort of signal molecule. That signal molecule is called a ligand as a general term, but you may see specific things for ligands, right? A ligand is a generic term for any signal molecule. And then there's a sending cell, the cell that sends the ligand. It's going to be in one part of the body, or it could be next door. And then there is a target cell. Target cell is the cell that the ligand is made for. Right, we talked about the endomembrane system. We talked about how the Golgi apparatus, or the Golgi complex, whatever we call it in this class, modifies a protein, right? And that modification has to do with where it's being sent. Well, the target cell is going to receive that signal, right? And it's going to have some sort of cellular response in response to that. Two different kinds of communication. There's short distance and long distance. Let's look at a couple different kinds of short distance communication. There is paracrine and autocrine. So let's do autocrine first. Autocrine is when a cell targets itself. Sounds kind of strange, right? But it does happen. A cell can target itself with some sort of communication, sort of like a feedback loop. We're going to talk about loops, not in this section, but this unit we'll be talking about feedback loops. And so it could create a loop that turns on or continues more, allows a process to happen more. There is paracrine, and so autocrine means self, and para means like alongside or next to, something like that. And so this is where it targets a nearby cell. This could be a cell that it's directly touching, or it could be a cell that's in the general vicinity, like a regional sort of idea, sort of like if people were in my classroom right now, I'd be communicating with them, right, locally. So that's another way of thinking about that, is that you'll see that term local associated with cellular communication. But again, same idea, signaling or sending cell, ligand, target cell, all of those things are the same. A couple of examples that you might see, and there's one that I'll bring out specifically because I know I don't have a picture of it on here, but there's like plant cells are a great example. And a lot of times when you see plant cells, you may think, well, how do they communicate with one another? They have cell walls. Well, they actually have little holes in their cell walls called plasmodesmata, which is your word of the day. Plasmodesmata, little holes that basically allow passage of materials, signaling molecules between plant cells. Gap junctions, we're going to look at that. Some immune responses. We're going to have some examples, but I know I don't have a picture of plasmodesmata, and so you do need to probably recognize that one, particularly as, exams like to use big words. Then there's long distance communication. So long distance communication has to do with any sort of signaling that involves like the bloodstream, right? Particularly in larger organisms, using the circulatory system for the signal molecule to get from one area of the body to another area of the body. This isn't necessarily just a human thing, and it could be plants too, right? Plants can use different kinds of signaling as well, but just long distance from one area to another area, usually using the circulatory system or something along that lines. A lot of times you will see the word endocrine associated with this, like an endocrine gland. An endocrine gland is a gland that releases its signal molecules directly into the bloodstream, and so be familiar with that. A lot of times the signal molecules in endocrine signaling or long distance signaling are called hormones. And hormone is just a signaling molecule, just another word for that. Usually some sort of receptor involved in this. You see the signaling molecule here releasing some blue dots into the system, circulatory system, and then those blue dots being received by this cell, the target cell, here on the other side of who knows where. Let's look at some examples. So on the left, you have a gap junction. Gap junction allows ions to pass from one cell to another cell. They're like little channels, right? Sometimes you'll see these in, particularly in heart cells. Heart cells have this coordinated sort of contraction, and these gap junctions allow for that. They can open and close. They look like little flowers, which is kind of neat. Synaptic transmission is an example of local reception. A synapse is a space between two nerves or neurons, and the neurotransmitter represents the ligand here, and it sort of diffuses across that synaptic junction there and goes from one nerve to the other nerve. And here's an example of hormone signaling. So this is a picture that you should become familiar with. Not this specific picture, but pictures like this. Particularly the epinephrine pathway is used all the time. And what you see here is you see some signal molecules, you see some cellular receptors, you see the plasma membrane. Let me zoom in a little bit here. You got the phospholipid bilayer thing going here, right? You got some of these alphas and betas just represent some sort of cellular receptor, right? And then they're going to trigger some sort of response. And here you have adenylyl cyclase, you have phospholipase C. I don't know what those things are. Well, I do, but you don't need to know exactly what they are. And then they trigger something else, right, which is going to then trigger some sort of cellular response. We're going to learn more about this in subsequent videos, but this is this whole unit almost, as far as the signaling part is concerned, is being able to look at a diagram like this and be able to draw conclusions from it, right? Or be able to read a prompt, and that prompt is saying, if you took away phospholipase C, what is the most likely result of that? And then you come down here and you'll see smooth muscle contraction in the heart would be decreased, or something, it's something like that, right? Where you have to look at a chain reaction and determine how changes in that reaction would overall affect. There's going to be a lot of this that you'll see. Strongly recommend working practice problems, AP Classroom, Khan, anything like that, just so that you get some familiarity with the ways that these problems work. Speaking of practice problems, here's one. A researcher exposes a cultured heart muscle cell to a neurotransmitter that normally only activates smooth muscles in the intestines. So a cultured heart muscle cells to a neurotransmitter that only activates smooth muscle cells. So as I'm reading this, I'm automatically thinking the smooth muscle cells have some sort of receptor that only goes to that neurotransmitter, right? No change in activity is observed in the heart cells, which the following best explains its results. I've already said what I'm going to go look for in ABCD, right? That those heart muscle cells, neurotransmitter that normally activates smooth muscles. So that neurotransmitter is specific to smooth muscle, right? And the heart muscle is not going to be activated by it. Let's go find that ABCD. A, the neurotransmitter is unable to diffuse through no indicator that would be the case, right? The heart cell lacks a specific receptor required to respond to the neurotransmitter. This makes me think like substrate enzyme, right? It's the same kind of idea. B is going to be the correct answer. We don't even have to look at C and D, but we can. Let's look at them. Neurotransmitters are only capable of functioning through direct contact. Nope, it's not. And the heart cells contain mitochondria that we have to make up things in order for D to be correct. We like B. I hope this was helpful. We're going to be doing 4.2.